first 2 days were introduction. So today onwards, we are going to do a little more deep dive into the core of this FTP, which is the reports, the reports of the British officers on Indigenous education. If you can see the photographs of these British officers, if you know any one of them, please in the message box, let me know if you can identify at least one of them. One of them is a popular figure, so you should be able to identify. So if you identify anybody, please post their names in the message box. So this is the way the beautiful tree is organized. You can see that there are 7 sections in it. First is Survey of Indigenous Education in the Madras Presidency 1822 to 26. Then Paulino Bartholomew's Education of Children in India, some extracts from that. Alexander Walker's Indian Education, Literature, etc., 1820. Then extracts from William Adams' State of Education in Bengal, 1835 to 38. Then extracts from J.W. Leitner's History of Education in the Punjab since annexation and in 1882. Then correspondence between Philip Hartog and Mahatma Gandhi, which we discussed in the introduction yesterday. Some list of temples in Tanjore receiving revenue assignments, list of individuals in Tanjore receiving revenue assignments, etc. So we'll focus F and G. G we may not go much into, but the main part, some of these reports. Let's get into it without much delay, because as I said, this will take a little bit of time, and this session may get extended to tomorrow also. So we'll start with the most important and the most discussed part of the beautiful tree, which is William Adams' report. So William Adams was a Scottish missionary and British officer, right, who was commissioned by William Bentinck, the Governor General of India, to systematically survey the indigenous systems of education in Bengal and Bihar in the 1830s. So his work is divided into 3 reports, which are published between 1835 and 1838. So he personally surveyed several districts, collecting extensive both quantitative as well as qualitative data on village schools, their administration, the curriculum which was used in these schools, the profiles, that is the community profiles of the teachers, student demographics, and the social reach of these schools. So William Adams reports, these are the 3 reports. First is called the First Report on the State of Education in Bengal in 1835, which covered part of the Nator district in present-day Bangladesh, focusing on detailed surveys of local schools. The second report on the state of education in Bengal, 1836, which expanded coverage to other districts, building comparative insights into teacher profiles, curricula, student demographics, local variations. Third report on the state of education in Bengal and Bihar, 1838, provided a broader regional picture, including Bihar, and assess the overall status of indigenous education along with policy recommendations for educational reforms. So these are the 3 reports which are collectively referred to as William Adams reports, and these are the primary sources of data for Dharampal's analysis in the beautiful tree. So what are the key findings of William Adams? So the most discussed finding is, of course, about these 100,000 schools. So he reported the existence of approximately 1 lakh indigenous schools across Bengal and Bihar. So this is the must be the 3rd report where the survey was extended to Bihar also, suggesting near universal basic education. So what does near universal basic education means? You would have heard this term called universal suffrage or universal education, right? I was mentioning yesterday that if you made a comparison between the state of education and literacy in India at that time with contemporary Britain, you would find that literacy rates were higher here. And also in terms of social reach, these indigenous schools were affordable and reachable to the lowest strata of society, which was not the case in Britain. And in fact, some of these the British studied these systems and implemented reforms in Britain in order to achieve universal basic education. So it was reachable to all, with estimates of at least 1 village school per 400 persons. His analysis details the inclusion of students and teachers from a variety of caste backgrounds, portraying a socially diverse and accessible educational landscape. So we'll see some of those surveys, the tables. The curriculum varies. Hindu schools emphasized Indian culture, Sanskrit, and Bengali, while Muslim schools taught in Arabic and Persian. So, see, primarily the pre-British schools consisted of the village schools were largely, why he calls it as Hindu schools is because the majority of the students studying in those village schools came from this Hindu religion, whereas the Muslim students would often go to what is called the madrasa. So both these were being surveyed, and Christian schools were yet to be, that is, missionary-run Christian schools were slowly being introduced, especially after Macaulay's Minute, etc. So therefore, he refers to them as Hindu and Muslim schools. So then, these is a summary of the district-wise snapshot of William Adams' surveys and his findings. So in the 1835 first report, right, as we mentioned, the districts covered are part of Nator, which is in Bangladesh today. So he covered 66 villages there. The total population surveyed was 10,800. The number of schools that he found in these 66 villages is about 27. So a little bit less than half, let's say. Okay. Average pupils per school is around 10. The percentage of population boys in school is, that is of the total population, is 2.5%. And then some notes on the curriculum and the teaching. That is Bengali, Sanskrit, etc., as well as in Muslim schools, it was Persian and Arabic. In the second report, he covered 5 thanas, including Murshidabad in Bengal. The total population surveyed was 1,49,000. Total number of schools found for these 5 thanas is about 76. Average number of students per school is about 20 to 25. So largely, see, these village schools would be like what you call one teacher, one school. So there would be 1 or 2 teachers catering to these students. And the percentage of population of boys in the school was 7 to 10% of that survey. Notes on curriculum, local teachers, then mixed caste backgrounds, pay often in kind. Often in kind means what? As I said yesterday, that they would give maybe food grains, not in cash, right? So the farmers would donate food grains. Somebody, maybe a textile merchant whose son is studying there, would give clothes. So in terms of gifts, this is how the fees of that teacher would be paid. So 1838, the third report covers Patna in Bihar, Tirhut, Shahabad, all these are in Bihar, and parts of Bengal. The population size varies, sample data extrapolated to Bengal and Bihar combined. So based on previous reports which he refers to, he's trying to extrapolate, give us a bird's eye view picture of the state of education in Bengal and Bihar. So in this report, he says there was 1 school for every 400 to 1,000 people, and the total estimate that he gives is about 100,000 schools. So again, on an average, there were 20 to 25 students in each school. And he says that the attendance was greater than England's rural average of that time. And he says in terms of curriculum, it included, in terms of community profile, he says it included nearly all castes and Muslim majority areas with Persian medium instruction. So this is a bird's eye view of William Adams' reports. What was the impact of William Adams' report? Adams' reports have been widely cited, again, particularly after Dharampal popularized it in the Beautiful Tree as evidence of the advanced and widespread nature of Indian education before and during the early colonial period. His findings challenged colonial narratives of educational backwardness and highlighted the decline of indigenous systems under British fiscal and social policies. So it is particularly Adams' report, which is often cited to show the extensive reach of these indigenous schools and how they declined after the educational reforms implemented after Macaulay's Minute was presented. The legacy of Adams' report, that it remains a cornerstone for the study of these pre-colonial and early colonial Indian education, frequently referenced by scholars analyzing the erosion of indigenous knowledge systems and infrastructure. So it gives us an insight into the kind of education that existed in the pre-colonial period and how it declined due to colonial interventions. So in summary, William Adams' surveys provided objective documentation of the inclusivity and vibrancy of indigenous education systems, how it included all communities, and how effective it was, how vibrant it was in providing basic elementary education to the children through these village schools prior to their decline under colonial rule. So two extracts which I have taken from the beautiful tree. The page numbers that I have given are from an old edition of hard copy of the beautiful tree that I had. So if you are looking up the latest, let's say PDF, which has been uploaded on the internet, etc., so the page numbers will vary; they may not match. So William Adams says in his report, a network of primitive vernacular schools. So what does he mean by primitive vernacular schools? Vernacular means the medium of instruction was the local language. So in Bengal, it would be Bengali. In Bihar, it would be, say, the Bihari kind of dialect, or other, say, Urdu, etc., for Muslim-dominated areas. Why does he call it primitive? Primitive in terms of that from the new schools that the British had planned to introduce. Their idea was that a school would have a fixed area of land. There would be infrastructure like a building, classrooms where you would sit and learn. And because often these village schools would happen sometimes in a temple, sometimes in a madrasa, sometimes under a tree, sometimes in somebody's house, right? So they did not have the kind of infrastructure that we see in schools today. But in terms of their effectiveness in communication of the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, they were quite effective. There are 100,000 such schools in Bengal and Bihar, he says, and assuming the population of those two provinces to be approximately this much, 40 million, is it? Or 40? Yeah, I think it is 40 million. There would be a village school for every 400 persons. So this is his estimate, that there was a village school for every 400 persons of the population. Then he says the number of Hindu schools of learning in this district, Hooghly he is pointing to, is considerable. Mr. Ward. So he's constantly referring to previous such studies or surveys also that have been done by other British officers. So he's referring to one officer called Mr. Ward, who had done a survey in 1818, stated that at Vanswaria, a village not far from the town of Hooghly, there were 12 or 14 colleges, in all of which logic was almost exclusively studied. So he's saying that there were not only village schools in many of these villages, in many of these towns, there were also colleges where exclusively certain specializations were studied. Right. So then he says the estimate of 100,000 such schools in Bengal and Bihar is confirmed by a consideration of the number of villages in those two provinces. Does somebody know how many villages totally there are in India? You can put it in the message box if you know. Right? There are about 6 lakh villages oddly in India. So, if let's say, even if 50% of those villages had village schools during this pre-British period and till these indigenous schools decline, so at least totally in India, how many schools would be there? At least about you can make a rough estimate of it. So this is what he is going by looking at the number of villages and seeing the kind of frequency of schools that are there in many of these villages. He's making an estimate. Their number has been officially estimated at 150,748, of which not all, but most have each a school. So he's saying so many provinces or number of villages, and this is the total number of 150,748. And because most of them have schools, so therefore he is arriving at an estimation of about 100,000 schools. So this 100,000 number is not a precise number, right? It is not just a very kind of rigid, accurate number that he is giving. It is an estimate that he is giving. So there will be still be 100,000 that have them. Let it be admitted that these calculations from uncertain premises are only distant approximations to the truth, and it will still appear that the system of village schools is extensively prevalent, that the desire to give education to their male children must be deeply seated in the minds of parents, even of the humblest classes. This is a very interesting comment that he is making. He's saying, even if you take this as an approximation figure, that from my experience, what I have seen, that these village schools are very, very extensively, they are prevalent, and the desire to give education to male children must be deeply seated. Male children, I explained this yesterday, that girls, even though they would not go to the village school, often their education would happen at home. So he is not counting, either he is not aware of this practice, or that, because he is referring to the village schools, he is discounting the girls' education, and he is particularly pointing out that this much is for sure, that the parents were very keen to send the male children to these village schools, and the desire to give them an education was very, very strong, even in the humblest classes, even in the poorest of the poor, the lowest strata of society. You could see this aspiration for getting basic education. Indigenous schools for learning imply the existence of indigenous elementary schools, but I find no mention of them in any authority to which I have referred. So he's saying that if there were, for example, colleges, 12, 14 colleges where exclusively logic is being studied, and this is higher in higher education, such institutions will necessarily have to be supported by indigenous elementary schools. Unless they've had some elementary education, they cannot go to these higher schools of learning. But he says that the previous officers, that he was referring to, don't seem to have taken note of this fact. An example of this we will see tomorrow, right after this module is over, when we go to pre-British period, when we look at universities like Nalanda, we will see that Nalanda, for example, is supposed to have had 4 million manuscripts. So, if you had universities like Nalanda where lakhs of students were coming and studying, naturally, without having some basic education, you cannot go to a university, a world famous university like Nalanda or Takshashila. So that is what he's mentioning, that indigenous schools for learning imply the existence of indigenous elementary schools also. And then he's referring to a very interesting practice of smallpox inoculation. So while he's doing this survey, he has noticed that some inoculation was happening. The smallpox inoculators in point of information and respectability come next to the class of general practitioners of medicine. One man sometimes inoculates 100 to 500 children in a day, receiving for each operation a fixed rate of payment, varying from 1 to 2 annas. The less amount if the number of children is great, the greater amount if the number is small. So it is very interesting to see that smallpox inoculation was going on in Bengal and Bihar. There is an article in Swarajya magazine. Later on, I'll share the link with Nidhi. She can share it in the group, where they show how these traditional Ayurvedic Vaidyas, in fact, were instrumental in the evolution of the modern systems of vaccination that we know today. But no credit is usually given to them. And it is no coincidence that India has also developed vaccines for COVID, for example, Covishield or Covaxin, is because there has been such a long tradition of this practice of inoculation or variolation, as it is called. So what these Vaidyas would do is, when they would find any person suffering from smallpox, they'll take a sterilized steel needle and prick the infected area, which is the pox, the pus, which comes out, and they will dry that needle and keep it safely. And next year, before the monsoon would begin, because usually in the monsoon season, the smallpox incidents would spread rapidly. And many of you, you will know that smallpox was the most dreaded disease of the 19th century because its death rate was very high. And even if you don't die, it would cripple you in many ways. You would lose eyesight, it will leave permanent scars. And millions of people died of smallpox. So next year, before the monsoon would come, these Vaidyas would go from village to village, house to house, carrying these sterilized needles, which they would be dipped in this pus, the dried pus of the infected patient, and they will prick it behind your ear. So they're inserting the pus into your blood because the pus will contain the dead virus. So this is what is called as an attenuated vaccine, where a dead virus is used for the smallpox inoculation. So then your body will study the genetic material of that dead virus and it will develop its own antibodies. And this is how you will develop immunity. And then they will prescribe a particular diet and they will say for the next 10 to 15 days, you should not eat certain types of food which are difficult to digest. You should eat light food. And they will also prescribe that you should mix neem leaves when you take bath. That every day you should mix crushed neem leaves in the water and take bath. So this is also was known to them that neem has certain antiviral, antibacterial properties, and it can act as a disinfectant, especially on the skin, etc. And then they would say somewhere around the 7th or the 8th day, you would get a high fever, and the fever will go away after 3-4 days, and you will be kind of inoculated against smallpox. So somewhere I was reading, I couldn't get that report. There was a report where I saw that British officers in South Africa are referring to this. The British officers in India sent a report to South Africa about this inoculation procedure, and they copy this inoculation practice of the Vaidyas in Bengal. And then the British officers in South Africa are reporting that they have been able to save the lives of 9 out of 10 patients by doing this inoculation, which is a very high success rate. 9 out of 10 is what, 90%. So those British officers are saying that the success rate of this inoculation procedure was very high, that it would prevent deaths of these patients. It would give them good amount of immunity against smallpox. Anyway, this is a very interesting detail, though not directly connected to that subject of education that we are discussing, but because William Adam is mentioning this, I thought I'll just cover that part. So if you can see on the screen here, I know the text is perhaps a little difficult for you to read, but later on when maybe the YouTube video is uploaded, you can just zoom it a bit and see these tables. So these are the tables. This is the data that is referred to in a beautiful tree. So you see the columns, he is profiling the caste of the student in district wise. So this is the caste wise profile of the student, which William Adams has reported from Bengal and Bihar. So this is the third report, 1838 report. So you can see that first district is Murshidabad, page 231. Then there is Birbhum, then there is Burdwan, then there is South Bihar and Tirhut. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 districts he has done this community profiling, and he has given the number of schools, if you can see in the first row. So in Birbhum, there were 412 schools that he was able to count. In Burdwan, 629. In South Bihar, about 285. And then Tirhut, about 80. And then the average number of students at the time of his visit in Murshidabad, about 10.1. Average age of the student, 10 years, 10 years, 9 years, 9 years, 9 years, like this. He's giving the average age of the students in these schools. The age of admission was 6 years, 5 years, 8 years, varies from district to district. Then the age of finishing the school is 16 years, 16 years, 15 years, 13 years. So he's giving when they were admitted, when all these details he is systematically recording in his surveys. Then he is saying number of students from different religions and different castes. So the number of Muslim students, the total number of students in Murshidabad he has covered is 1,080. In Birbhum, 6,383. In Burdwan, 13,190. In South Bihar, 3,090. In Tirhut, 507. Out of them, in Murshidabad, there were 82 Muslim students out of 1,080. Then in Birbhum, there were 232 Muslim students. In Burdwan, 769, 172, and 5. Then the Hindu population is shown to be the majority in many of these schools. So there it is 998, 6,000, 12,000, 3,000, and 500, like that for district wise. So amongst this Hindu population, now he is giving the caste wise profile of the students. So Brahmins, he is saying in Murshidabad, there were totally 181 Brahmin students out of 1,080. And Kayastha is the OBC community. If you know, Swami Vivekananda belonged to this Kayastha community. So 129 out of 1,080. Then there were the Kaivartas, 96. Then there was Suvarnabaniks, so possibly goldsmiths, if I remember correctly. Then there are Tantis, about 56. Sunris, I think are, if I remember correctly, they should be the coppersmiths, smithy community. Then Thelis, the oil extractors, those who work, the artisans who work with oil presses, etc. So you can see that the list of these communities is extending, right? The second table is about the caste-wise profile of teachers, and here in the first table, it is the caste-wise profile of the students. So in Birbhum, out of the 6,400 students or so, 1,800 are Brahmins. Kayasthas are 487, Kaivartas are 89, Suvarnabaniks are 184, like this. So he's showing that most of these communities are represented in the school. So amongst the teachers, if you see the second table at the bottom, you can even see Chandal, right, which is usually considered as the untouchable community. Even from them, there are teachers, one teacher in Murshidabad, one teacher in Birbhum, 4 teachers in Burdwan, right, Chatris and Kshatriyas and all these communities that are being represented. That is why these reports became so significant. They were considered such path-breaking because he was showing this community profiling of these students in each of these schools. So this is why I was saying that people who say that there was caste-based discrimination in these schools, that other castes will, or the education was confined only to the upper caste communities, that others were not allowed into the schools, they should read William Adams' report, they should read The Beautiful Tree, see this community profiling of the students given by the British district-wise. So this is the kind of eye-opening data, as I said, which shows us that such discrimination did not exist in the village schools. But Here, of course, we have to accept this point that there were Sanskrit schools which were called Tols, or the Vedic Patashalas, Veda Patashalas as they were called, Gurukulams as they were called, which was exclusively for the Brahmin community. So where the Vedas would be taught exclusively to the Brahmins. So those were separate Gurukulas. Those were separate Patashalas. What he is surveying here is the village schools, in particular the elementary village schools. And in these elementary village schools, these were open to all communities. Everybody was allowed to come and study there. So this is the highlight of William Adams' report. In these two tables, he is covering the books used in Bengal and Bihar districts. So this is from all the three reports. So you can see a long list of books that he gives. This table, I think, goes into about 3-4 pages. I'll just highlight some of the important texts that he is saying. I think the first one is called Mukta Bodha. Some could be, some ethical text or a grammatical text. Then there is Panini's grammar is being taught. Panini is there. Then what else is there? Let me have a look. Then there are Shabda Kaustuba, so some kind of etymology, vocabulary in Sanskrit, Mahabhashya by Patanjali on Panini's grammar. See the advanced level of text that are being taught. So advanced Sanskrit grammar is being taught to them. Siddhanta Kaumudi, I think it is a Vedantic text that is being taught. So philosophy is being taught to them. Then there are Dana Leela, Dadi Leela, Guru Vandana, Shubhankar, right? All these religious texts are being taught. Chanakya is being taught, possibly some extracts of possibly Arthashastra or related texts that were available to them. Then Saraswati Vandana, then what else is there? Hitopadesha, right? Niti Kathas. So all these ethical stories, moral stories that are being taught. So then in other tables, he will show that what were the Arabic or Persian texts that were being taught to the Muslim students also. So you can see the breadth of the kind of subjects that were being taught in these village schools through these the curriculum that was used or the texts that were being recorded by William Adams in his report. So this is the first report. The second officer is G.L. Prendergast. Prendergast was a British officer, member of Governor's Council in the Bombay Presidency. So during the early 19th century, he was notable for conducting surveys on indigenous schools in Bombay around 1820s, which is again documented in Dharampal's Beautiful Tree. Prendergast's observations highlighted the extensive presence and effectiveness of indigenous education during that period. On June 27, 1821, he recorded that virtually every village in the Bombay territories, large or small, had at least one school, with larger villages often having multiple schools. These schools taught young natives reading, writing, arithmetic through an economical and efficient system, usually funded by small contributions from parents. So this is the extract taken directly from, I'll show you the extract. So this is this highlights of his report. Prendergast emphasized that the indigenous educational system was widespread, practical, socially inclusive, with many cultivators, petty dealers proficient enough to keep accurate accounts. So he's looking at the practical application of the education that was being given, that he noticed that many of the farmers, the traders there were able to keep accounts very accurately. They were able to do mathematical calculations very accurately. And this was made possible because the elementary education was effective. Skills that rivaled those of lower orders in Britain at the time. So he says they were as good as, these traders, etc., or farmers in Britain. His work, as cited by Dharampal, counters colonial narratives that question the prevalence and quality of Indian indigenous education before British intervention. So later on, we will see that Macaulay will kind of dismiss all this and saying that all this indigenous education is useless, ineffective, etc. So these reports provided by officers like William Adams, Prendergast, etc., counter that narrative of later British officers like Macaulay, etc., who were trying to run down or show this indigenous education in a negative light. In summary, Prendergast's survey and testimony serves as a significant historical evidence of a deeply rooted and functioning indigenous school system in early 19th century Bombay Presidency, underscoring the richness and accessibility of education long before colonial education reforms began to undermine it. Right? So what are the key findings of Prendergast's reports. There was hardly a village, great or small, throughout the Bombay territories without at least one school. Larger villages had multiple schools, and towns and cities had many such schools in every division. These schools taught young natives reading, writing, and arithmetic. The education system was highly economical, with fees ranging from a handful or two of grain to perhaps 1 rupee per month paid to the schoolmaster, scaled according to the parents' ability to pay. So if in a larger village, let's say there are 50 students or 100 students in a school, each student would bring a rupee a month as fees to the teacher. So he would earn about, let's say, 100 rupees a month or 50 rupees a month, depending on what was being given, either in cash or in kind. So those days, it was quite a good sum for a teacher, right? When the average per capita income of average Indians was what during British rule, some would be something like 18 to 20 rupees, I think, if my memory is served. So, it was a good salary that they were earning. The system was simple yet very effective, so much so that there is hardly a cultivator or petty dealer who is not competent to keep his own accounts with a degree of accuracy, which Prendergast believed exceeded that of lower orders in Britain. So he says, in terms of its efficiency, in terms of equipping the population to do, accounting, etc., which they needed for their everyday work, the schools were very, very effective. Then he says, more prosperous dealers and bankers kept accounts with an ease and clarity comparable to British merchants. So just as these East India Company huge merchants were dealing in tons and tons of raw materials and spices, and they were trading, many of these prosperous dealers, farmers, bankers in India were also capable of doing these large trades, large kind of transactions with great ease in maintaining those accounts. Schools mostly operated without dedicated buildings, often held in temples, mosques, private homes, or the teachers' houses. So this is what I was saying, that with minimal infrastructure, no formal infrastructure, often just a banyan tree would be enough for running these village schools. It could be a temple, it could be a mosque, it could be a home, it could be a teacher's house, but these schools would function effectively. Average school size ranged mostly between 2 and 15 students, with most institutions being single teacher. This is also, I was mentioning, that many of these schools were what are called one teacher, one school kind of a model. So in fact, in recent times, there has been an institution called Ekal Vidyalay, which tried to revive this kind of practice in remote areas where there were no access to formal schools. They would send these volunteers who would go and open these one teacher, one schools. And in the evening, especially for laborers, children, etc., who would go to work in the morning, they would conduct these evening schools for them. So, this is inspired by these indigenous village schools. Curriculum focused on the rudiments of reading, writing, and arithmetic, including multiplication tables. So, as I was saying yesterday, basic numeracy and basic literacy was always given a lot of importance. That once they finish this elementary primary education, they should be able to count, they should be able to multiply, they should be able to do basic mathematical operations, they should be able to read, write, right? All these basic skills were imparted to them. Education was predominantly for boys aged between 6 and 14, with practically no provision for girls. So this I was mentioning, that girls were largely educated at home. Teaching methods were chiefly oral, with no formal examination or grading system. So in most of the traditional education in India, the teacher would repeat, say for example, if it is a multiplication table that he is teaching, they would memorize it. It was largely oral transmission of knowledge that would happen, and no formal grading or examination system would exist. But nevertheless, right, in terms of practical efficiency, as we saw, it was quite good enough for giving them that basic literacy and numeracy. Teachers had very modest remuneration, often supplemented by gifts in cash or kind from parents. So it was like voluntary gifts in cash and kind, the teachers would be paid. Schools were largely community managed with local funding. So there was no central kind of government funding for these schools, where the local panchayat was giving the fees to the teacher, nothing like that. No central control was there, but the whole community would come together to manage this, village schools with the local funding. So this is the extract. So we have already seen, right? So this is what he is saying, right? The last line, as I said, was very, very important. Upon a system so economical and at the same time so simple and effectual, right? Because the whole of society was pitching in with funds, right? And therefore, if let's say in a school of say 50 students are there, many of them are giving let's say gifts in cash or kind. If one student comes and says, "Sir, I don't have money. he would not be rejected. He would not be sent out of the school like it happens today. If you don't pay the fees, you would have seen in newspapers, big private schools in Delhi, etc. I will not name them, but some of these schools are employing bouncers today, right? They will have bouncers installed in front of the schools, and if the student does not pay the fees, they will not allow the students or the parents to enter the school premises. So this is how commercialized cutthroat education has become today. So this is what Prendergast is pointing to, that it was a very economical and affordable, simple and effectual, that the poorest of the poor could go and get at least basic education, basic literacy and numeracy was affordable, made accessible to them. So we saw William Adam. Second, we saw Prendergast. William Adam was in Bengal and Bihar. Prendergast was in Bombay Presidency. Third is Thomas Munro. Thomas Munro was a very famous British officer. Some of you, if you are in Tamil Nadu, if you are in Madras, etc., definitely would have heard. So this is the statue of Thomas Munro, which is there in Chennai, right? Erected. This is a post that was made on social media by the Greater Chennai Corporation. So he was a British officer, governor of the Madras Presidency. So he was a high-ranking, officer in the British hierarchy, right? And in fact, before he becomes this governor of the Madras Presidency, there is a very curious incident about him that is recorded in the, which he himself has recorded in the British Gazette, which would be published, that he was sent to a place called Mantralayam near Kurnool. This is a mystical incident that happens in his life, and he was asked to lay a railway line or construct something there. And he wanted to kind of vacate the premises where this Mantralayam temple, if you have heard of Mantralayam, it is a pilgrimage center for a community, Vaishnava community, which is called the Madhvas. And their very famous saint called Raghavendra Swami's temple is there in this Kurnool in Andhra Pradesh there. So he wanted that area for construction there. And when he goes to the temple, he sees an old monk coming out of the sanctum of the temple. And that old monk wearing orange colored robes comes and speaks to him in fluent English. And he tells him that this is a very important pilgrimage center where in future a lot of important religious kind of events are going to happen here, and thousands come here. And therefore he requests him not to disturb this place, that he is whatever construction he wants to do can go around that ashram without disturbing it. And looking at his fluency and looking at his knowledge and wisdom and the character of that saint, Thomas Munro, it seems, was very impressed. And then he looked around and he found that this old monk had disappeared. So he goes to the temple office and asks who was that monk. So the temple manager, etc., says there is no monk here. The only monk here is the Raghavendra Swami, and he shows him that photo. So then Thomas Munro says, but this was the person who came and spoke to me. So the temple manager is kind of taken aback. And he says, what are you saying? Because Raghavendra Swami had passed away. But the devotees believe that he would stay there in the subtle body. So Thomas Munro, they say, had a vision of this saint called Raghavendra Swami. And in fact, this Raghavendra Swami used to bless people by giving what are called mantrakshatas, blessed sacred rice, which are red in color. So Thomas Munro, in fact, shows this red-colored rice as proof that this monk had come and met him, that he had blessed him with this red-colored rice. And Thomas Munro also says that the monk predicted that he would become the governor of the Madras Presidency. And when he goes back to Madras, they say that his promotion, the notification, he was waiting for him. So this is an interesting incident, that is background incident that is told about Thomas Munro. So he's the same person who is Madras Presidency reports we are seeing here in this beautiful tree also. So these are reports between 1822 to 1825. As documented by Dharampal in the beautiful tree, Munro initiated this inquiry to gather authentic data about the state of native education, recognizing that the British administration knew little about it, despite having conducted other extensive surveys like geographical and agricultural ones. So Thomas Munro is pointing out that though the British had conducted a lot of other kinds of surveys, they had not focused there on the educational aspect of it. So Munro ordered district collectors to collect detailed reports on indigenous schools, resulting in data showing the presence of approximately 11,575 schools in Madras Presidency, serving around 1,57,195 students, along with 1,094 colleges or centers of higher learning, with 5,431 students. So look at the data, it's quite mind-boggling to think of, right? So it's 11,000 schools, elementary schools, primary schools, 1,57,000 children studying in those schools, then 1,094 colleges, centers of higher learning with 5,000 students. He noted that there was roughly one school for every 1,000 people in the presidency, implying that about a quarter of boys in the school-going age group were under instruction in these indigenous schools. So about 25% of the population was going to these schools of the school-going age group population. Importantly, Monroe acknowledged that the state of education in the Madras presidency was higher than it was in most European countries at no very distant period, and that while it may have been better in earlier times, it had not undergone major changes except due to population shifts or wars. So the consistency he is pointing out that only when there is some major political disturbance it would get disrupted, but otherwise consistently these schools have been running and functioning. The survey found an extensive indigenous educational system characterized by widespread village schools, community management, social inclusiveness. So you see the similarity of the reports, what William Adam is reporting from Bengal, Bihar, etc. The same kind of report is coming from Bombay presidency. Prendergast is also saying that the schools are very inclusive, that they are very efficient, that they are very affordable to the lower classes. The poorest of the poor are able to access elementary education, primary education. Same finding Thomas Monroe is also giving from Madras presidency. Monroe's minute recognized that indigenous education had been underestimated and was vital to understanding Indian society better. He emphasized the need for authentic documentation rather than conjecture. So he was saying, instead of doing speculation, please study these indigenous schools. The system included a significant number of students educated at home, possibly outnumbering those in formal schools. Very, very important, revealing a parallel home-based education system. This is what I was pointing out, that even these surveys, which are giving us some mind-boggling data and statistics about the extensive reach of these schools in many areas, these are discounting the fact that a significant number of students were also undergoing education at home. Homeschooling was happening in many of these places across India, and it was Thomas Monroe estimating that those who were getting this kind of homeschooling, their number would be outnumber the students who are going to the schools. And he says it is a parallel home-based education system that was running. So this is, this was not, in fact, properly surveyed or studied by these surveyors, these British officers. So this is the exact extract from the beautiful tree from the Education Commission report by the Madras Provincial Committee. So this we have already seen, right? This is the kind of statistics that he has given. So the most beautiful report comes from the next officer. So William Adams, Prendergast, Bombay. Then we had Thomas Monroe, Madras. The fourth is Leitner, G.W. Leitner, who was the Director of Public Instruction in the Punjab province. So he was a British Orientalist and educationist who conducted a detailed, voluminous survey of indigenous education in the Punjab around the time of its annexation in the mid-19th century. After Maharaja Ranjit Singh, etc., we know that these Britishers, took over the Punjab provinces, which was annexed to the British Empire in the mid-19th century. So his work was published around 1882. He served as the principal of Government College Lahore and was instrumental in founding the University of Punjab. Leitner's survey was more direct and critical of British colonial policies than earlier studies, highlighting the advanced and widespread nature of indigenous schooling in Punjab before colonial disruption. See how interesting it is that the British officers themselves were criticizing the British policies, saying that such an extensive system of education is there, efficient system is there, you're tampering with it, you're interfering with it, and you're destroying it without understanding their efficacy, etc. So this is very, very interesting to note how these early British officers were praising these indigenous schools. So look at what he is saying. These are the exact extracts from Beautiful Tree. He says, respect for learning has always been the redeeming feature of the East. To this, Punjab formed no exception. Torn by invasion and war, it ever preserved and added to educational endowment. So he's, what a beautiful statement, right? That's why I said Leitner's reports are the most beautiful to read, because he's very, very, he has great admiration when he's observing the society in Punjab and their commitment to education. He is saying that even though Punjab formed the frontier provinces, right, from where many of these foreign invasions would happen, Punjab, Rajasthan, as we all know, suffered the worst brunt. Gujarat, Punjab, Rajasthan suffered the worst of the worst brunt of these foreign invasions. So even though these regions were constantly torn apart by invasion and war, he says, they never gave up on education. Their commitment to education was preserved through all this political conflict over the centuries. So what a beautiful, a statement to come from a Britisher who is talking about the educational achievement of Punjab. And the first line, respect for learning has always been the redeeming feature of the East. So he says, what distinguishes India is this commitment to education, commitment to knowledge. It is a knowledge civilization. That is why it is called Bharata. The very name Bharata means knowledge civilization, right? Our commitment to knowledge is expressed in that word called Bharata, that which is committed to the light of knowledge. So this is what he is reflecting in his reports. Then he says, there was not a single village which did not take pride in devoting a portion of its produce to a respected teacher. Remember that Punjab province was kind of the wheat granary of India at the time, right? Huge amount of agricultural produce would come from Punjab. Even today we know this, right? You would have seen this farmers agitation, all these Punjabi farmers going and blocking Delhi, etc. How powerful they are, how influential they are, and how prosperous they are, right? The same was the case at that time. So he's saying that all these, imagine wealthy farmers, prosperous farmers, of course during the British rule then that prosperity and that agriculture declined, but he says they all took pride in donating to these, if they found that a particular teacher was known to be a good teacher, then they would devote a significant portion of their agricultural produce to such teachers. Through all these schools, there breathed a spirit of devotion to education for its own sake. What a beautiful statement, right? He says he finds that in these schools, the teachers were teaching for the sake of education, not for the sake of money. So that commitment that education for its sake, knowledge for its sake, the students as well as the teachers displayed this commitment to education, not merely, they were not teaching merely for the sake of the money they were getting, but that the spirit of devotion was visible in these schools. So he counted totally about 30,000 schools in Punjab provinces, 4 lakh students studying in these 30,000 schools in 1854 and 1855. So this, you can say, of all these reports, this is one of my favorite reports, which gives such a glorious kind of very positive kind of picture that it presents of these indigenous schools. Continuing the findings of Leitner, at the time of annexation, Punjab's annexation, estimated 3,30,000, right, or 330,000 pupils were enrolled in various indigenous schools across Punjab, proficient in reading, writing, and arithmetic. Indigenous education was deeply rooted in the community, often connected with mosques, temples, dharmashalas, supported by land endowments that were preserved and respected by local customs. So what does it mean? So sometimes land endowments would be given to these schools or the teachers, that a particular part of agricultural land would be given in gift to them as a grant to them, and whatever agricultural produce or profit is coming out of it, the teachers would be allowed to enjoy that, take that as their salary, as their gift. The schools covered a broad spectrum of learning, including classical languages, Arabic, Sanskrit, religious texts, law, logic, philosophy, and medicine. The scale and quality of education under the Sikh regime and pre-colonial Punjab were superior to what was in place in Europe at the time, according to Leitner. So the British, all the reports you see, they themselves are admitting that these indigenous education that was being provided was superior to what was available in Britain and Europe at that time. After the colonial annexation, and especially following the events of 1857, which is the Sepoy Mutiny, is what is being referred to, the first war of independence as it is called, the indigenous education system was systematically undermined, with land grant endowments revoked. So by 1857, already Macaulay's Minute would have been implemented, right? 1835 onwards, his minute was implemented. So the decline becomes visible in just about 30 years' time. And also because of the hostility, because after the first war of independence, the British became more hostile towards the Indians, and they started undermining, any efforts to encourage these indigenous schools. So these land grant endowments were revoked, stopped, or diminished. The schools were destroyed, and educational books burned, leading to a sharp decline in pupils and schools. So this stands out in terms of Leitner is reporting that there was physical violence against these village schools committed by the British. They destroyed these schools, the books were burned, etc., leading to a very sharp decline in the participation of these local students in these schools. By 1880, the number of pupils had dropped significantly, but still indicated a large indigenous system that remained despite these challenges. So it just took about 50 years for the British to just destroy what was there for almost 2000 years. This whole system would have been there. Within 50 years, how systematically they have destroyed it. Right? Leitner was critical of British administrative neglect and the failure of colonial education policies, noting that they destroyed a rich, effective, and socially inclusive educational tradition. Now, remember what Gandhiji said, that the beautiful tree perished. So, Leitner's report is a kind of vindication of what Gandhiji said at that Chatham House speech in London in 1931, that the Britishers uprooted the beautiful tree of Indian education. So, this is, I think, an Austrian missionary and also Orientalist. So he has written a work on the education of children in South India. So he learns Malayalam and Sanskrit, and he's also produced, I think a book on Sanskrit grammar. So just a few highlights from his report. The education of youth in India is much simpler and not near so expensive as in Europe. The children assemble half naked under the shade of a coconut tree, place themselves in rows on the ground, and trace out on the sand with the forefinger of the right hand the elements of their alphabet, and then smooth it with the left when they wish to trace out other characters. What he's saying is that on the sand, this practice of the writing of the alphabet would be taught to these children. So they would write with the right hand and wipe it off with the left hand. So even without a slate or a chalk piece, pencil, etc., they were teaching the basic alphabets to them just by using sand on the floor. They would teach them, or they would put rice in a plate and teach them. The writing master called Agian or Eluttachan, I think that is a Malayalam word for teacher, Eluttachan, who stations himself opposite to his pupils, examines what they have done, points out their faults, and shows them how to correct them. So he is describing how the teaching learning process was happening in these indigenous schools. This method of teaching writing was introduced into India 200 years before the birth of Christ. So he is recording that this system of teaching the alphabet has been there for almost, how many years? 2000 years almost. Right. So this same system was consistently being followed, according to the testimony of Megasthenes. So Megasthenes is this Greek historian who comes along with Alexander, which is 326 BC. So he's saying that Megasthenes recorded the same system. He observed the same system that was used for teaching the alphabet. Imagine for 2000 years, the same system was continued till this guy comes and observes. So, and it still continues to be practiced. No people perhaps on earth have adhered so much to their ancient usages and customs as the Indians. So see the beautiful, compliment that he has given, that he has never seen something like this, that for 2000 years they have adhered to these practices and customs without giving them up. When the guru or the teacher enters the school, he is always received with the utmost respect and reverence. His pupils must throw themselves down at full length. So they're doing Sashtanga Namaskara, they're falling down on the floor to do Namaskaram to the teacher when he comes to the class. Place their right hand on their mouth and not venture to speak a single word until he gives them express permission. So without the permission of the teacher, they will not talk in the class. Those who talk and pray contrary to the prohibition of their teacher are expelled from the school. So he's saying the rules are so strict, as boys who cannot restrain their tongue, if they cannot control their tongue, and they are consequently unfit for the study of philosophy. So they will not be taught higher learning or higher philosophy. So he must have observed a religious school, possibly a Veda Patashala or a Gurukulam like that, where philosophy was being taught and the discipline was very, very strict. And if they would even do cross-talking in the class, then they would be expelled from the school, etc. So we'll stop here for today. Tomorrow's class, I think I've been able to cover more than what I had anticipated. Most of the reports I've been able to cover. Only Dharampal's analysis of these reports remains. About 3 slides are there. So that will take about at least 10-15 minutes time. So tomorrow's time will be perfect for the session on this and on the pre-British educational scenario. Right, so we'll stop here for today. Over to Nidhi. If you want to take a question or two, I think if you want to extend for 5 minutes, we can do the questions.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I think it was an extended overview of 4 reports. I think most of us are more familiar with William Adams' work and, of course, Thomas Munro's work. But going through all these 4 gives us a holistic overview of what they had to say about indigenous Indian education. So in between in the chat box, there was a debate about caste and gotra. You can check it at your
Oh,
convenience.
uh,
Because you did mention OBC and caste, so there was a little bit of a conversation.
okay.
That conversation is there in the chat box. And I think Sangeeta ji had a question about girls' education, percentage of girls in school. So that has been adequately addressed with all the discussion that we have had so far. Okay, just a minute. Yes. So I think Sangeeta ji, your question about whether the medium of instruction was vernacular language, that also has been addressed by Sir. Dr. Vanishri ji has asked, where can we see his writing about Raghavendra Swami?
So
Thomas
that,
Munro's
yeah,
writing.
this incident is recorded in a gazette. I'll share it. I'll get it and share it with you, Nidhi ji. You can post it in the group. Right?
Sure, sure. Chandra Mohan sir, do you want to come in with your insight about how Thomas Munro's successors visit the Mantralayam temple? You wanted to share something with us? Yes, Chandra Mohan sir, you have raised your hand. You can go ahead.
Sir, namaskar, sir. Pranam, sir. Prabhu,
Namaste.
sir.
Namaste.
Pranam, Nidhi, madam. Am I audible, madam?
Yes.
Sir, this is actually Sir Thomas Munro's, his successors of 5th or 6th generation, sir. Once in 4 or 5 years, they used to visit Mantralayam temple even this day in traditional Indian attire. And Mantralayam priests will give them all the rituals like which are offered for VIPs, sir. This is one great aspect, sir. And what I want to share with you is, so as I come from Andhra Pradesh and I reside near Tirupati, sir. At present, I'm in Bangalore, but I'm a resident of that area, sir. Sir Thomas Munro has gifted a huge vessel to Tirumala Sri Venkateshwara temple, and in local Telugu language, it is called as Munro Gangalam. And in Brahmotsva times, water is filled into that vessel, sir, and it is used for Sri Venkateshwara's anointment, sir. And Sir Thomas Munro was the man who has given enough funds for renovation of so many temples in Kadapa and Kurnool districts, sir. And he was a very nice officer, sir. Very nice officer. He visited Srisailam and he made all these things, sir. And I have that paper cutting, but very, very old, sir, because before COVID, actually, that Sir Thomas Munro's family members are visiting. If possible, I will share to Nidhi madam, sir. This is what I want to just express about Sir Thomas Munro, and who was the man who went for establishment of book societies and libraries and spreading education into remote corners of coastal Andhra when he was Madras governor, sir. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Very nice.
Thank you. I think these were some very useful and relevant insights that were shared by Chandra Mohanji. So I had this one question as to when the British did decide to do a survey or make an assessment of India's indigenous education system. What could have been their main motive as colonizers who were very clear that this was a project where they had to decimate indigenous culture, language, education systems, traditions, etc. Why this focus on education was important for them?
Okay, so if you remember the introduction, Nidhi, when I showed you this book on colonialism and its forms of knowledge. So this is what Bernard Cohen is saying, that colonialism itself is a project of control, and the control happened through knowledge of the colonized people, right? So their whole effort at understanding Indian society was for two reasons. One, they wanted to bring the whole of India under a uniform kind of British administration. For this, they needed to understand the society. The more they understood, the more their political control over the colonized people would increase. Second was to extract revenue from us in terms of taxes or in terms of agricultural, all these raw materials which they were looting. They had to know, right? Or the more they know what are our weaknesses or what are our strengths, the more they will be able to exploit us. So basically, their whole effort at understanding Indian society was essentially part of that project of colonial control. But we should also keep in mind that there were many early British officers who came to India with this East India Company, etc., who were genuine admirers of Indian society also. Like we saw Leitner, for example, right? Thomas Munro also has, especially with these experiences that he had in Mantralayam, right? They change sometimes after interaction with the local society. They had a very positive view of the society also. So some of these studies were also to help in a way, and out of their admiration or their aspiration to understand genuinely the strength of Indian society also, some of these early surveys were being done.
Yeah,
But the systematic surveys which were done, commissioned by the East India Company, were part of that larger project of control and gaining control over people.
Okay. Yeah, we'll continue this discussion tomorrow. We'll take one last question from Samreen ji, and Sangeeta ji, please hold on to your question. We'll take it in tomorrow's session. So she's asking, in village, students got education in vernacular, but which language university like Nalanda used to teach? Students
so Nalanda, it's a
yeah.
good question. So higher centers of learning, especially for texts of science, which would be mathematics, astronomy, law, Ayurveda, medicine, philosophy, spirituality, religion, all this would be usually in Sanskrit. Sanskrit was the language of the Shastra and the science. So higher learning would often, these texts would be written in Sanskrit, and therefore basic proficiency in Sanskrit, especially in higher centers of learning like Nalanda, Sanskrit would be expected. Tomorrow's session, we will see that in the entrance exam itself, Huan Sang, etc., will mention that their Sanskrit knowledge was tested. Only if they were proficient in Sanskrit, admission was given to Nalanda, Takshashila, etc. And then these scholars who would learn these texts in Sanskrit, they would go and translate it into the other local languages sometimes. So, for example, you find Aryabhata's Aryabhatiyam, sometimes there will be Telugu commentaries on it. Or in Malayalam, you will find other mathematicians writing other works of mathematics based on those texts, etc. So the primary learning in these higher centers of learning would happen in Sanskrit. Then it would slowly percolate into the local society through the local languages.
Wonderful. Thank you. I hope, Samreenji, that answers your questions. So we are going to stop for today and have an extended discussion on the remaining slides tomorrow.